In Washington, a political confrontation is reaching a boiling point. Democratic lawmakers have taken the extraordinary step of publicly demanding the removal of President Trump's Secretary of Homeland Security, a move that signals deep fractures over how America secures its borders and enforces its laws. This isn't routine political theater. When members of Congress call for a cabinet secretary's dismissal, it represents a serious escalation, one that raises fundamental questions about accountability, oversight, and the direction of the nation's homeland security apparatus. The pressure campaign is intensifying by the day, with Democrats presenting a unified front rarely seen on matters of national security leadership. What triggered this confrontation, and what does it mean for the future of the Department of Homeland Security? The calls for dismissal have come from prominent Democratic voices in Congress, with lawmakers using official platforms to amplify their demands. These aren't offhand remarks made in passing interviews. They represent deliberate, coordinated statements delivered through press conferences, official letters, and formal congressional communications. The language being employed carries significant weight. Democratic leaders have characterized the situation as untenable, arguing that the current DHS secretary can no longer effectively serve in the role. Their statements have been direct and unambiguous, leaving little room for interpretation about their intentions. These demands have been channeled through multiple official mechanisms. Some lawmakers have issued formal written requests, while others have used their positions on relevant congressional committees to raise the matter publicly. The messaging has been amplified through official social media accounts, floor speeches, and coordinated media appearances designed to maximize visibility. What makes this development particularly notable is the breadth of participation. This isn't a single legislator voicing frustration. It's a collective effort involving multiple Democratic members who have chosen to publicly align themselves with the dismissal demand. The official nature of these communications elevates the confrontation beyond typical political rhetoric, transforming it into a formal challenge to the administration's Homeland Security leadership structure. To understand this confrontation, we need to examine the figure at its center. The Department of Homeland Security Secretary serves as one of the most consequential positions in any presidential cabinet, overseeing an agency responsible for border security, immigration enforcement, cybersecurity, and disaster response. The current secretary was appointed by President Trump and confirmed through the standard Senate process. Since taking office, they have been tasked with implementing the administration's Homeland Security agenda, a portfolio that places them directly at the intersection of some of the most contentious policy debates in American politics. Their stated priorities have aligned closely with the broader administration vision, emphasizing enforcement measures and operational changes that have drawn both praise and criticism depending on political perspective. Within the Trump administration's policy apparatus, the DHS secretary functions as a key implementer, translating executive directives into agency action. This role inherently generates friction. The secretary must navigate between White House expectations, congressional oversight, legal constraints, and operational realities on the ground. It is a position designed to attract scrutiny, and in this case, that scrutiny has escalated into outright calls for removal. The Democratic case against the DHS secretary rests on multiple grievances that have accumulated over time. Critics have pointed to specific policy decisions implemented under this secretary's leadership, arguing that certain agency actions have crossed lines that warrant removal rather than mere policy disagreement. Central to these criticisms are concerns about how the department has carried out its enforcement mandate. Democrats have questioned whether particular operations have been conducted appropriately, suggesting that the secretary bears direct responsibility for agency conduct they view as problematic. These aren't abstract philosophical objections. They're tied to specific actions taken by DHS personnel under current leadership. Public statements made by the secretary have also drawn fire. Lawmakers have seized on particular remarks, characterizing them as evidence of an approach they consider unacceptable for someone holding this level of responsibility. The argument extends beyond disagreement with policy outcomes to questions about judgment and leadership philosophy. Additionally, critics have raised concerns about the department's responsiveness to congressional oversight. Some Democrats have expressed frustration with what they perceive as inadequate cooperation with legitimate legislative inquiries, framing this as part of a broader pattern. Taken together, these grievances form the foundation of the dismissal demands. For those making these calls, the accumulated weight of policy choices, public statements, and agency conduct has created a situation they argue cannot be remedied through normal political channels. The Department of Homeland Security has seen its share of leadership controversies since its creation in the aftermath of September 11th. The agency's broad mandate and politically sensitive portfolio have made the secretary position inherently contentious across multiple administrations. Previous DHS secretaries have faced intense scrutiny from Congress, though the nature and intensity of that pressure has varied considerably. Some faced criticism over disaster response, others over immigration enforcement approaches, and still others over perceived management failures within the sprawling department. What distinguishes different eras of DHS controversy is the degree to which criticism crosses partisan lines. In some cases, secretaries faced genuine bipartisan pressure that reflected shared institutional concerns. In others, the criticism remained largely confined to the opposition party, reflecting policy disagreements rather than consensus about leadership failures. The current situation invites comparison to these historical precedents. Understanding whether this moment represents routine partisan opposition or something more significant requires examining whether the pressure campaign extends beyond expected political battle lines, a question central to assessing what happens next. The word bipartisan carries significant weight in Washington, and its application to this situation deserves careful examination. For pressure on a cabinet secretary to be genuinely bipartisan, it requires meaningful Republican participation, not just Democratic claims of cross-party concern. The Republican response to these dismissal demands reveals the true nature of the political dynamics at play. Some Republican lawmakers have remained publicly silent, neither defending the secretary nor joining the calls for removal. This silence itself can be interpreted multiple ways, as quiet discomfort, strategic calculation, or simply a decision to avoid a contentious internal debate. Other Republicans have offered explicit defenses of the DHS secretary, framing the Democratic demands as politically motivated overreach. From this perspective, the pressure campaign represents standard opposition tactics rather than legitimate oversight concerns warranting removal. The critical question is whether any Republican voices have actually joined or expressed sympathy with the dismissal calls. Even modest cracks in party line defense would signal something more significant than routine partisan warfare. Without substantial Republican participation, characterizing this confrontation as truly bipartisan becomes problematic. The label matters because it affects how the public perceives the legitimacy of the demands and how the administration calculates its response strategy. The Trump administration's response to these dismissal demands reflects its broader approach to political confrontations with Democratic opponents. When cabinet members come under fire, the White House must decide whether to mount a vigorous public defense, offer measured support, or maintain strategic distance. In this case, the administration has signaled its position through official channels. The response has framed the Democratic pressure campaign as politically motivated, portraying the attacks on the DHS secretary as part of broader opposition to the administration's policy agenda rather than legitimate concerns about individual leadership. Administration allies have amplified this messaging, characterizing the dismissal demands as an attempt to obstruct policies that the president was elected to implement. This defensive posture seeks to transform the debate from one about the secretary's conduct into one about policy disagreements and partisan overreach. The White House calculation involves weighing multiple factors: loyalty to appointed officials, the political costs of appearing to capitulate to opposition pressure, and any private assessments about the secretary's effectiveness. How firmly the administration stands behind its DHS chief will significantly influence how this confrontation ultimately unfolds. Beyond the political theater, this confrontation carries real implications for the Department of Homeland Security's operational effectiveness. When agency leadership becomes embroiled in intense political controversy, the ripple effects extend throughout the organization. Immigration enforcement operations continue regardless of Washington debates, but the personnel carrying out these missions are aware of the political storm surrounding their leadership. Sustained controversy can affect agency morale, recruitment, and retention, factors that influence long-term operational capacity even when immediate missions proceed unchanged. Border security initiatives require consistent leadership attention and interagency coordination. A secretary consumed by political survival may have diminished bandwidth for the complex management challenges inherent in overseeing a department with over 200,000 employees and a vast operational footprint. Congressional relationships also matter for DHS effectiveness. The department depends on legislative cooperation for funding, authorities, and policy support. When relations between DHS leadership and key lawmakers deteriorate to the point of dismissal demands, routine congressional business becomes more complicated. The uncertainty itself creates challenges. Career officials and political appointees throughout the department must navigate an environment where leadership stability cannot be assumed. This dynamic can affect decision-making, initiative implementation, and the department's ability to execute its multifaceted Homeland Security mission effectively. Several paths forward exist, each with distinct political mechanics. The secretary could remain in position, weathering the criticism with continued White House support. This scenario depends on the administration's willingness to absorb ongoing political costs and the secretary's personal resolve. Resignation represents another possibility, though voluntary departures under pressure carry their own political calculations. Such a move would be portrayed very differently by each side, as accountability by critics, as capitulation by supporters. Congressional action offers a more formal route, though the mechanisms available to legislators seeking removal of a cabinet official are limited without executive branch cooperation. Hearings, investigations, and funding leverage represent the primary tools available. Finally, escalation remains possible. The confrontation could intensify through new revelations, expanded criticism, or administration counterattacks that deepen the political divide. Which scenario ultimately unfolds depends on factors still developing, making this a situation demanding continued attention. This confrontation over the DHS secretary reflects deeper tensions about Homeland Security policy, executive accountability, and the boundaries of political opposition. Whether the pressure campaign succeeds or fades, the underlying disputes will persist. We'll continue monitoring this story as it develops. If you found this analysis valuable, subscribe and enable notifications for updates. Share your perspective in the comments below. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.